Here I have a sheet metal piece that I am able to flatten. Likewise, I can go to an engine and explode the view. I can even animate the collapse. The reason I can do these things in SolidWorks is due to a feature known as configurations. I want to go over today how configurations work and how you can leverage them to your advantage. Here I have a piece that, say, is going to be intended to be 3D printed, but I may want to have a version compatible for injection molding should I need. Making this able to be injection molded would require a number of changes to features and have perhaps some features added. In order to do that, I will use a configuration to have a version of this part for 3D printing and a version of this part for injection molding. I come over here to the Configuration Manager, and here I have my configurations with one main configuration. I want to add another, so I go to this top level, right-click, and Add Configuration. I can give this a name, Injection Molding. I can even describe it. You can even add a comment if you would like. Notice Suppress Features is active. We want that to be active, so make sure that that box is checked. Now I've created a version of injection molding as well as my default configuration. I can add a feature. A snap fit like this would easily require a pass-through shutoff for injection molding. I can create a sketch on this face here, highlight this face and convert entities, and simply extrude cut through all. So I've created this open feature that will help us to injection mold the part. And if I go back to my normal configuration, that is no longer there. I can go to my feature design tree in my default 3D printed configuration, and the cut extrude is suppressed. I can activate this cut extrude in the configuration simply by unsuppressing, but I would like to leave it out. So lesson number 1 for configurations is when I add a new feature, it will be unique among the two configurations. Let's say if I show my injection molded configuration, I want to add, or modify rather, a feature that was already there before I created the other configuration. I can go to my feature design tree and say I want Boss Extrude 2 to have a 2-degree draft. That will assist me in removing the injection mold from the cavity. I add 2 degrees draft, and if I activate my default 3D printed configuration, notice this draft is still there. Lesson number 2. If I modify a feature that already existed when this configuration was created, the changes are carried through to both configurations. What I can do instead is go to Boss Extrude 2, right-click and edit the feature, and say this configuration. Now, if I go back to my other configuration, and I go to Boss Extrude 2, undo the draft, I have draft in one configuration and not in the other. Lesson number 3, you can always specify what configurations you want things to apply. Let's say I want to make my 3D printed version wider without affecting my injection molding. You can see if I make this 3.5 inches and rebuild and go to injection molding, the parts are the same width because I'm modifying a feature that already existed. So to get over this, I'll show my default configuration. Maybe I'll take it back to 3. I'll confirm that this is the exact same width, and it is. So from my default configuration, I'll edit my sketch, and this time I can say 3.5, and I can say this configuration. Now if I go back to my injection molded version, it is narrower. So that's how you can disconnect the attributes of certain features from one configuration to another. It may be worth mentioning, if I have many configurations, I also retain the option to specify configurations. And when I do, this menu comes up, and I can select all or reset selection and choose which configurations this should apply to. So if I go back to lesson number 1 and add a feature, you'll recall that features added to one configuration do not show up in the other configuration. That is specifically because on the properties we have suppress features checked. And that's what makes these configurations so useful. I do not recommend unchecking that box. If I want to have a parent and child relationship, perhaps I may want to have altering dimensions between two 3D printed parts. I can create a child configuration. I'll delete this, and I can even get rid of the sketch. Now on the Configurations Manager, I go to my default configuration and add Derived Configuration. And I can give this something like Printed Version 2. Alternate 3D print version. Now you'll notice I have this as a child of this. If I show my default configuration and I add a feature as I have, this will show up in my child configuration, but it will not show up in the other configuration for injection molding. If I add a second feature onto my child configuration, it will not show up in the parent configuration. Neither will it show up in the 3D printed version. So the lesson here is changes I make to the parent show up in the child. Changes I make to the child show up nowhere else. As a final example, any good part would have more fillets than this. If I add a fillet at this base, it indeed shows up in this configuration. Adding a fillet here, it does not show up in the parent. This use of configurations helps with new product development and creating different versions of ways a part can be manufactured and other useful features. If this video was helpful, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.